There for Care is brought to you by CareScout, with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We don't provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs. Today's guest is Brian Johnson, CFO of CareScout.
My dad had full-blown dementia, kept him at home for as long as we could until an event happened. And that event was a fall in the home, which we knew we needed to then take another step. When you go to see them and they don't know you, they think that you work there. It is an emotional drain that you have to worry about your mental stability to get through this. Unfortunately, with my father through COVID, I lost really about 18 months of not being able to see him. We all agreed as a family that it was the quality of care, not the quantity of life that they have left. I wish I would have educated myself more on dementia before we got to the stage. You never know when something's going to happen. So plan early, plan for the unexpected, and prepare.
Welcome back to There for Care by CareScout, a podcast all about navigating the aging journey, whether for yourself or a loved one. My name is Katy Boyles, and today our guest is Brian Johnson. Brian has more than 2 decades of experience working in finance in the long-term care industry. Today, however, we're talking about his personal story. He has cared for not one, but 2 family members. We are going to talk all about the difference in those experiences, the impact it had on the family, and lessons he learned. And with that, Brian, welcome to There for Care.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Can you explain a little bit about the unique situation with both your mother-in-law and your father?
Yeah, well, my mother-in-law was diagnosed early. She had started with COPD, and then her health continued to decline. As a result of that, we started her in home care at home, and then that manifested into going to assisted living, to a nursing home, and then to critical care. My father, a different story, in that my dad, full-blown dementia, and as a result of that, kept him at home for as long as we could until an event happened. And that event was a fall in the home, which we knew we needed to then take another step. The difference is between my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. My mother-in-law was open to have somebody come in and help her. My father was not. So that provided challenges for us as a family because we were the main caregivers for him and on a regular basis. You know, when both situations with my mother-in-law as well as with my father, we all agreed as a family that it was the quality of care, not the quantity of life that they have left. And that's where they've sacrificed all of their lives for us as their children. We wanted to make sure that they were taken care of as they started to work down the journey of end of life. I am one of 4 boys. Next to the oldest brother and I were the primary caretakers of my father. So we needed to make sure that both of us had power of attorney, medical power of attorney, that we could take care of anything that came up. That was first and foremost. And then looking at the assets that were available, because both in my mother-in-law and my father, their level of care increased as they progressed through the aging journey. Both of them, unfortunately, went through end of life in the facilities in which they were in. It's unfortunate, and I get that, but we were there to make sure that they had everything they needed to go through that journey.
And, you know, paying for this care is just one aspect of it. There's so much more that goes into it. The emotions that are involved. Can you talk more about that side of it? I know you said that you had different family, whether your wife was an only child, but on your father's side, you had 3 brothers that you had to work with.
Yeah.
What was the most challenging part of that?
You know, the most challenging was all of us knew what we would deal with in the end state, whether it was my wife and I with my mother-in-law or with my 4 brothers. You know, we were in a very interesting dilemma because we did this through COVID. You know, as you go through somebody that has dementia and you go through that journey with them, at least we have found in both examples we have, that you just keep going further and further back in their life. And it's hard because, you know, you are a parent yourself, you have children, then you're trying to take care of your parents, you're in the sandwich generation. But when you go to see them and they don't know you. Or, you go in and you ask them questions, they think that you work there, or, you're just there to take care of them. It is an emotional drain that you have to take care of yourselves, and you have to worry about your mental stability to get through this, because it is a long journey. And we experienced that, unfortunately, with my father through COVID. I lost really about 18 months of not being able to see him, right? We could go see him, basically through a glass wall or something to that effect. But due to everybody was scared of what COVID was going to happen, you couldn't really see him face to face. Before that, we were going by every day, every other day to see him, check on him, make sure he had what he needed, asking any questions, answering questions maybe that the facility had, what they needed from us. And that dynamic changed. And that was probably one of the hardest things that we've had to deal with, of losing that attachment, of you can't see them and they're continually digressing more, and you're not there to help them through that process.
Yes, that's a whole nother added layer of stress. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
in your father's situation, you have 3 brothers.
Yes.
Those are 3 other people that probably have their own opinion on what needs to be done, who needs to be doing things. What helped in that situation going through to stay together and united?
We talked all the time. It was we all got to the agreement of, yes, you're right. It is about the quality of care. So he has quality remaining through his life. And during that time, Katy, I just wasn't able to see Dad in many of these situations where Dad might have a medical episode, because Dad unfortunately had to have a pacemaker, and he would lose his blood pressure, and he would faint. As a result of that, a lot of times in these facilities, they would just send you to the hospital. Dad would get dehydrated because he wouldn't drink. All of these things add up, and you let people know what's going on, and continual communication is the key. Everybody, even I can speak of my 3 older brothers, all of us process it differently, but making sure that everyone is aware of what is going on and the next steps in which we're taking are the key. It's not easy. I wish I could Google it and figure out a way to do it. Unfortunately, it's not there. But having that and a support system with their families helped immensely.
Yeah, I think communication is definitely the key in all of this, which is easy to say,
Yeah.
very hard to do in practice. Not to mention, you said the sandwich generation.
Yeah.
At home, you had a family to take care of
Yes.
and children. How did you manage that while also working a full-time job?
It's difficult. You really figure out how much adrenaline you have when you get put into these situations, because that's what you run on, is adrenaline. It's a situation where, my kids were extremely close with my mother-in-law, not as much so with my dad, but that was even harder with them as they watched their grandmother decline. And they, unfortunately, experienced that end of life with her. A little bit more hidden with my dad because they weren't as attached to him, but they knew what I was going through because they experienced it with their mother-in-law. So they worried about me and my wife and my brothers and their families quite a bit, because it's a long journey. It's something that you need to be prepared for, both legally, financially, but more importantly, mentally, because you've got to get through how these things work and realize there are high highs and low lows in this process.
And, you're saying it's a journey.
Yes.
And that people need to know that going into it. What would you say has changed in your mindset? You've now watched 2 people that you cared for in your family go through it. You've also had a career in this industry. Has anything shifted with how you look for yourself in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I will tell you, there's a couple of things that happened. As I talked about with my dad, he grew up through the Depression. He collected a lot of things. He had, at the end, we've had to work through, as my dad was in the facility, we sold the home. We had to clean that out. There's a lot of things you go through. So right now, especially in my mind, and for my kids, I'm, as you well know, I'm getting ready to become a grandfather, and it's important for me to know that I have simplified things for them as much as I can. I do not, one of the things that worries me is, am I going to be a burden to them when I get to that age? And not saying my in-law, my mother-in-law or my dad was, but I've learned enough through that process to know how to put some things in order today to make it simpler for them so that they are not overly burdened, because they're going to go through a lot of emotions. They're going to have to take care of things. They're going to be in the same situation that I was, of worrying about quality of life, not quantity of life. And let's get all the other things out of the way. Let's simplify it. Let's make sure everything is there legally, there professionally, and whatever you need to do today to make that easier on them.
And what I find that's so interesting is you worked in this industry for 2 decades.
Yeah.
Yet when you experienced it yourself, you still learned
Oh, absolutely.
a ton having to go through it. Because I'm sure the
Absolutely.
last thing you think about when you have to worry about putting your mother-in-law or your father somewhere is, I might need to clean out their house.
Yes.
I might need to do all these other things. Where would you suggest that someone starts to learn more about this?
It is a lot of information out there today, and talk to people and there's a lot of support groups that are going through this. As I have continued to age, you hear more and more about dementia support groups. You hear more about aging groups that help you. Get involved, learn those things, and become educated, because unfortunately, you never know when something's going to happen. Dad fell, right? I will tell you, I was a little bit of about this. We were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the weekend because my son's a diehard Denver Bronco fan. We went to a Pittsburgh Steelers Denver Bronco game. I went to pick Dad up. Remember this as if it was 5 minutes ago. I needed to take him to the bank to do some work with him on a financial affairs, and I found him in the floor. Dad was fine because I just saw him Thursday evening before I left to go to Pennsylvania, walking around fine. He was, just as coherent as he can be. You never know when something's going to happen. So plan early, plan for the unexpected, and prepare.
Is there anything that comes to mind that you wish you would have known or done differently?
I wish I would have educated myself more on dementia before we got to this stage, because, I remember taking him to neurologists and they were doing some tests, and, I just didn't know enough, and I wish I would have known more. I would have asked more questions. I would have been far more involved than where he was.
Yes. So for anyone who's listening right now who might be going through this in the moment, do you have any advice for them?
Make sure you have a very good support system. If you have family members, involve them. Make sure that, it's not just you and your immediate family, but your aunts and uncles, because it is their brother or sister that are there, so that they understand what it is and the stages of what they're going through. Because in the case of my dad, where dementia was involved, we kept going further and further back. I was back at the end of my dad's life. We were back in conversations when my dad grew up here in Richmond, Virginia, where he was a paperboy in Richmond, Virginia, in downtown Richmond, and talking about the different buildings. It just happens as part of the disease, and just make sure you have family around to support them, as well as for not only the person that's going through it, but also for them.
And that is such great advice for people to hear. It's definitely not easy, but we're hearing a lot of just plan ahead, have
Yes.
those hard conversations to get everyone on the same page.
Absolutely.
I think there's an element that you will never be able to plan enough, so
Yeah.
you might as well try to get ahead of it.
Right. Make sure that you've got flexibility, because this process that you will go through is going to be taxing on you. It's going to be taxing on your loved ones and your family. Make sure that you get some time. You hear people talking about respite time, not only for the person that is going through this, but it also needs to be for you. I have had my cousin that has had the same situation. They needed to move their father into their home. That was equally, if not more difficult than what they had thought, because of the being there 24 hours a day. So that was for their mental well-being and mental stability. They also ensured their home care provider was coming in when they were there. they had the ability to come in more often and stay longer periods of time. So just make sure you plan ahead. You put some breaks in for yourself. Even when they live in facilities, you need to make sure that that happens because it is taxing on you because, you will have to deal with changes that you see in your loved ones. Levels of care step up. Unfortunately, you do see the decline in people as they continue to age. Be prepared for that. Realize that unfortunately, when you step up in levels of care, that also is a financial burden on you because you are also now experiencing more of that. So those are the things that a couple of the things that you really need to continue to look at. You need to continue to monitor. Also stay on top of making sure if they're in a facility and you're able to bring things from home that they are as comfortable as possible, trying to make their surroundings as to homeliness as they can be. Because that, my dad served in the Navy, and when people would come in, my dad remembered because it was early in his life, even though we were dealing with dementia, but we had a signal flag that he used on his Navy ship. He was a signalman, and he would talk to people about that. And those are the things you put there that can be memory joggers for them that help them remember and just stay close to them.
And that's a great advice for
Mhm.
someone to help through that situation. And you mentioned as you go up in care, it gets more expensive.
Mhm.
Can you talk more about what finances are involved? Because it's not just paying a facility, figuring
Yeah.
out who's going to come into the house. What else happens?
So, there's incidental costs that you have, right? It's not just the room and board. There's care costs that are there, but you have incidentals simultaneously because guess what? Your loved one still needs clothes. And, unfortunately, sometimes they have accidents that where you need more bed sheets or you need XYZ to take care of. They just be prepared for those things that happen and be prepared that they have that there for them. In the facility my dad lived in, it was very difficult for him, to go out and get any care that he needed. So we changed some things over to happen in the building. We didn't want to take him out to go to his doctor. We changed over to the facility doctor. There can be costs associated with those related items as well. Just be prepared for those things that happen. It's not just room, board, and care.
I think that's important for people to also recognize that you're going to form a close relationship with the people who are
Yeah.
caring for your loved one and if they're in a facility. What was your experience finding one for your father and your mother-in-law?
One of the big things was how close they were to home. Oddly enough, the facility that we picked for my father was 1.25 miles from his home. Dad didn't know, had no idea because of where he was from a mental standpoint, but that's the facility that we felt most comfortable with. You'll feel it. Well, my mother-in-law started there as well because we had such great success with my dad. We moved my mother-in-law in, and the care that they got there was great. They really took care of him. And unfortunately, they couldn't help my mother-in-law. She needed to have stepped up care, so we had to move her in Richmond. But it's a process. So just it takes time. Get prepared. It doesn't happen overnight. And if we had done that, we had been looking in advance. And I'm glad we did because when my dad fell, when we were leaving the hospital, he went to a rehab. Rehab was very clear to us. Unless you have 24-hour home care with dad at home, dad needs to live in a facility. So be prepared for that. As I said earlier, I didn't expect him to find him in the floor when I got back to go see him, but preparation is the key, and early and often checking in with your family members so they know what's happening is a godsend.
Yes, and you can only plan for so much, but it's a very important message to just try to do
Right.
as much as you
Yeah,
can ahead of
absolutely.
time, especially before these issues arise where you can still talk to your loved one about
Yes.
what they want to experience, what they want to go through.
Yep.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your personal story.
Thank you, Katie. Glad to do it.
Be sure to follow along there for care. We have new episodes dropping every week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.